Sorry?
Are we going to see who is attending?
Yes, you can. You have two tabs if you click on the participants list.
Oh yeah.
You as panelists see.
Yeah, okay.
We are also live on our LinkedIn account.
Okay.
So when I will see Valentina in the attendees, I will move her to panelists. Let's hope that she can. I still do not have Valentina, but yes, usually we give participants 5 minutes to log in.
Okay.
Valentina should join us in a few moments. Yes.
Good. I see the number of attendees is increasing. That's
yes.
Good sign.
Hi, Valentina, welcome. Good, we solved it.
Hello, good morning. Good afternoon, rather. Thank you. Yes, I'm not sure what was going on, but I'm glad I'm here now.
I know. It's always the European Commission settings and so on. We only have issues all the time with the European Commission email, so it's good.
Very good.
Okay, so we can start because attendees will continue to log in during the session. You
okay.
Can start anytime you want.
Okay.
And let me know when I have to share the screen.
Okay, so let's start. First of all, welcome everyone for being here. This workshop on water reuse is organized by the working group Water and Sustainable Agri-Food Systems of the Water Europe, which is led by Antonia Lorenzo and Alfieri Police. That will be also speakers in different sessions. And the title of the workshop is very eloquent. It's towards the adoption of Regulation 2020-741, guidance, document, and approach to risk management. This regulation, the Regulation 2020-741, on minimum requirements for water reuse, has been a key strategy for the European Commission to promote the use of reclaimed water. It was approved in June 2020. But its application will not be, let's say, compulsory until June 2023. So there are 3 years for adaptation and still many questions open, especially regarding the implementation on water risk management plans, which is one of the requirements set by the regulation. So the idea of today's workshop is to put some light in these issues, which is also one of the main topics of our working group, Water and Sustainable Agri-Food Systems. For us, the use of reclaimed water implies sustainability and linked to circular economy action plan. And that's why we have been working in the last year to develop a white paper on this regulation. This white paper will be presented in today's workshop by Antonia Lorenzo. So we wanted to take the opportunity to have also some speakers from the Commission to help us understand better what will be the best strategies for implementation. So that's it from my side. I have to thank you, Water Europe, to give us the opportunity to organize this workshop. I don't know if from Water Europe there is someone who wants to say something. Turk, Andrea, or
we apologize. Yes, I was in contact with them. They really apologize. They have a parallel project meeting, and unfortunately, they cannot attend.
Okay, okay, no problem. Anyway, thank you very much, Anka, for yes, for allowing us to organize this workshop, which is very important for the water community. And then I would like to introduce our first speaker, Alfieri Police. He's a chief researcher at IRSA CNR and has a deep background in water reuse. So Alfieri will give us an introduction to the EU regulation on minimum requirements for water reuse in agriculture. So Alfieri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rafa. I will try to share my screen. Yes, you possibly see my first slide. Yes, so I am Alfieri Pollice, I'm chief scientist at IRSA CNR in Italy, and I will give some quick, say, background information and introduction to the regulation 2020/741. Before doing this, though, I would like to show you some pictures that I've taken yesterday evening when I was at home watching the news. These are news from the drought in northern Italy in these days. And the Po River is the main Italian river, the largest Italian river. It's a basin of about 70,000 square kilometers. It crosses 4 important regions in the north. And this is the situation after 4 months of drought of this river. It's about 3.5 meters below its normal level nowadays. I wanted to start with this because the first question that we should ask is why we need regulatory instruments on water use, and in general, why we need regulatory instruments at the European level for water. This is one of the problems. We are facing strong water scarcity as an effect of climate change, and of course, in the case of Po River, this is not transboundary river, but in Europe we have a majority of transboundary rivers, and so we have lots of international issues with respect to water availability and water scarcity. Almost 1/3 of the European territories is affected by water stress, and it was estimated that reuse of treated wastewater from half of the existing wastewater treatment plant would reduce this water stress by 5%. This is one part of the reasons why. The other part refers to the priority that we need to give to water reuse with respect to other non-conventional water resources options. And in particular, water use is let's say it's more important than other options in terms of lower environmental impact with respect to desalination and water transfer, and independency on meteorology like rainwater harvesting, etc. And of course, it also has important potential energy savings with respect to water withdrawal from the ground and nutrient recovery. Another set of reasons why it's of course the need of harmonization of European legislation, at least in respect of 2 aspects. First of all, in terms of harmonization with respect to the free circulation of agricultural products, primary products, especially when irrigated with reclaimed water, because normally these are regulated by national regulations, and so when the agricultural products need to travel across Europe, then there are issues and problems with different standards and different national regulations. So this needs to be harmonized. And then also in terms of establish fair conditions for the investment for innovation in the water use sector in general, and in water treatment in general, in water technology in general, and in water use in particular. Having said this, the history, the pathway, the genesis of this instrument comes from the early 2010s, when a number of communications from the community and the parliament have pushed a bit the European Commission to consider the drafting on a proposal on water use, specific proposal of water use based on the two important pillars of the Water Framework Directive and the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. So it was created this ad hoc task group by the DG Environment in 2015, and within the common implementation strategy for the Water Framework Directive, composed of 16 member states plus Norway and 12 organizations, international organizations, mostly in the field of water and agriculture, of course. And the first say task of this group was to define the instrument. So the instrument regulation was considered more attractive, more effective, more adequate than a directive. The difference between directive and regulation are very quickly, say, directive is more flexible, but it's also much more slow in adoption because it requires transposition into national laws, and this can take years, as we all know. Whereas the regulation is more stringent, but it's immediately applicable. So as Rafa was saying before, this regulation in particular was entered into force exactly 2 years ago, and will be compulsory in the application exactly 1 year from now, in June 2023. So let's see the main features, the main aspects of this regulation. First of all, there is an interesting approach to the instrument regulation. This is not this regulation is not providing limiting instrument. It's not a limiting instrument. It's not providing constraints. It's rather promoting water use. It is rather encouraging water use and aiming at maximize water use across Europe as an instrument to alleviate the scarcity. We know the aim. The aim is to establish minimum reclaimed water quality requirements and monitoring, and the definition of risk management as a tool for working with this issue. Also, the field of application is, of course, irrigation of food products and non-food products, but also the field of application is open to enlargement. It's open also to possible applications in industrial wastewater treatment and environmental water use. And the scope also is interesting because the regulation is considered, actually water use is considered to be applicable by default by member states. So it's a normal practice in agreement with the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive that says that water should be reused every time it's possible, whenever appropriate, actually. And so the regulation is applied every time a member state is reusing water. And the decision that water should not be reused is not appropriate, should be justified and motivated. And this motivation should be evaluated periodically. It's based on 2 pillars: the fit for purpose approach, which is related to treatment sustainability. So defines different quality levels according to different types of crops and irrigation methods, and the risk management approach for safeguarding public health and environmental protection. And this is the base instrument for the application of the regulation, as we will see. Other relevant aspects of this new regulation are the definition of the definition of exact point of compliance. So it is identified clearly that the point of compliance for the standards of the regulation are to be met at the point where the operator delivers reclaimed water to the next actor in the chain. And also responsibility of the operator are very well defined. Main responsibility, I mean, the operator, the reclamation plant operator is the main responsible mostly for all the monitoring activity, quality monitoring activity, and the elaboration of the water use risk management plant, which is the main instrument that this regulation, for the application of the regulation. The member states are in charge mainly of providing permits and authorization to water use within the water use management plant, and doing awareness raising, education, training of consumers and end user, which is also very relevant for the application of water use. Once again, we have two annexes to the regulation. One is Annex 1 is where the quality levels are defined and the monitoring frequencies are defined as well. And then there is Annex 2 where general principles of risk management practices are indicated, because specific guidelines are in preparation and will be the object of a delegated act that is going to be it's in preparation. So to go a little bit more in the details of the regulation itself, this is the table, the first table of Annex 1, where the possible uses of reclaimed water are listed and are described. First of all, we are speaking of agricultural irrigation. Agricultural irrigation means food crops for human consumption raw and food crops for human consumption processed, which means cooked or industrially processed, and also non-food crops, which is feed, energy, ornamentals, etc. So we have 4 classes of reclaimed water, A, B, C, D. The highest quality is A, which can be used for irrigation of crops that can be eaten raw and where the edible part is in direct contact with reclaimed water through all irrigation methods. So this is the highest quality water. Then we have B, when the crops are not in direct contact with reclaimed water, or processed crops, or feed for animals, for feeding animals, through all irrigation methods. Then there is quality C, which is the same as quality A, the same as quality B for the type of crops, but the irrigation method is limited to drip irrigation or other irrigation methods that do not involve direct contact with the edible parts of the crops. And then there is class D, which is only dedicated to industrial or energy and seeded crops. The second table defines the quality of these 4 classes. As you see, the quality is based on a limited number of parameters, mostly indicators. Indicator of microbiological pollution is the Escherichia coli, and we have indicators of chemical and physical quality, BOD5, TSS, and turbidity, and the possibility of adopting also Legionella and helminth eggs as additional indicators for specific cases when there is the risk of aerosolization or for irrigation of pastures, respectively. So it is not it's not a big table of requirement of standards. Is just very simple in terms of application. Of course, these requirements can be integrated through the additional standards, for instance, for heavy metals, for pesticides, etc., where the situation is that these need to be monitored. So according to specific situations, let's say. In terms of monitoring, Table 3 and Table 4 define the monitoring requirements for both routine monitoring by the reclamation plant operator, so quality monitoring for say defining the standards of reclaimed water, and validation monitoring, which is only to be adopted for new plants or for upgrades of existing plants, modifications, new equipment, etc. Also in this case, in the case of validation monitoring, only the highest class of water is considered, and only microbiological indicators are used for the assessment. And also in terms of performance, it is considered the log reduction of these indicators through the adopted technology. I have to speed up because I'm a bit late. So second annex, Annex 2, gives, as I said, the general principles of the risk management. The risk management is tackled according to a classical 3 steps approach. And so identification, assessment, and mitigation. And I will go quick with this because, of course, risk management is then much more treated much more in details in the description of the water use risk management plan that will be the object of one of the following presentations. So identification of water use system, description of water use system, identification of potential hazards, type of hazards that are present in the air, in the specific case, and identification of people and environments potentially affected by these hazards. Then the assessment, which is split between evaluation of risk for the environment and evaluation of risk for human and animal health. And this also takes into account previous regulations and previous directive in this area. And then options for mitigation. So possible additional requirements with respect to Annex 1, as we have said before, heavy metals, pesticides, antibiotic resistance, all different possible additional hazards that we can consider, and possible preventive measures, both in terms of, say, static and dynamic preventive measures, I would say, in terms of monitoring, extra monitoring requirements, etc. But specific guidelines for the definition of the water use risk management plan are currently in preparation. I would like to conclude just providing a few ideas on possible opportunities for member states provided by this new regulation. There is the potential development of a number of sectors. First of all, the sector of services for engineering, so those related to the water use value chain, design, plant construction, water distribution, etc. Then the possibility of promoting new governance models for reclaimed water resources, so public, private, mixed public and private. There is no standards yet in terms of governance. Everything is to be arranged yet. Revision of national, regional legislation, of course, is another opportunity. The incentives, tariffs, economics of the whole reclaimed water value chain. And then, of course, the build-up of confidence, awareness, information, education of consumers and end users towards the use of reclaimed water, which is a potential powerful tool to contrast climate change effects. With this, I finished and give the floor to Rafa, I think.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much, Alfieri, for this introduction. It was very useful to put us in context. So our next speaker, Antonia Lorenzo, she's the CEO of BioAzul, and she's also the leader of the working group. Well, as I said before, in the working group Water and Sustainable Agri-Food Systems, we have worked to deliver a white paper, which is now under revision, but it's in the final steps, so it will be soon public. And the idea is also to have this event as a presentation to all the audience of this working group. And the white paper. So Antonia, the floor is yours. You can start.
Okay, thank you, Rafael. Thank you everyone for being here with us today. I will start sharing my screen, and I hope you can see it properly in 2 seconds. It's fine, yeah? Okay, so as Rafa was mentioning, this white paper on possible effects of the EU regulation 2027/41 on minimum requirements for water use on the agri-food value chain and strategies for its implementation has been developed and is being in its final phase by the working group on water and sustainable agri-food system for the Water Europe. We also add that this has been also performed or prepared in cooperation with the working group on human capital and also with the working group of water and public health. As you can see here, the editor is Andrea Rubini from Water Europe, and you can see also the authors of the white paper. I would like to mention that this is kind of nice and powerful mix of 13 experts from academia to private sector, from the very north of Europe, Finland, Sweden, to the very south, Italy, Spain, but also going through Ireland, Belgium, and Netherlands. So it's representing the sensitiveness toward this topic of different countries and different, let's say, profiles. Also, the gender aspect is more or less balanced. We have 40% of women also in the team. The paper is, today I would like to make a quick, let's say, overview of the white paper, main contents and main conclusions. But as Rafa just said, this will be published most probably end of June. So we will have it in the final version, and you will have the opportunity to read it in full. So I will start talking a little bit about the needs for water reuse in agriculture and the opportunities for the sustainable growth associated. So, well, Terry was already saying something about this. The agriculture accounts for, in average, 40 to 60% of the water that is being extracted and used in Europe. It can be up to 80% when we are talking about the Mediterranean region. So, implementing water reuse projects in agriculture will have a high impact in the preservation of our water resources in terms of quantity, but also in terms of quality. So we are facing now some problems with water scarcity. Here, this water stress map, which is quite shocking. And we also have some difficulty to forecast the water availability in the future. So the use of non-conventional resources, such as the reclaimed water, is getting increasing interest. Well, in addition, we have this population which is growing, the need to produce more food. So we need to ensure that we will have water for these crops, to water and for irrigation of these crops. And water is a constant source of, reclaimed water is a constant source of water, and it's independent of the climate. It represents a net increase of water resources, especially if we are talking about coastal areas. And it also provides on the top these nutrients that can be directly assimilated by plants. So we are enabling irrigators not only to have access to water, but also to cut down a little bit the cost by reducing the fertilizer consumption, because some are already in the reclaimed water. And the water reuse approach is totally align with the EU and global strategies, as well as the Water Europe vision and the value of water. And this clear need for a common EU environmental and health standard for water reuse that was also mentioned by Alfieri. This harmonization is key. It's key in order to allow the free movement across Europe of these products, which has been fertilized by drinking water. Also about the innovation potential, as Alfieri mentioned, and support the companies that are developing these wastewater treatment and reuse technologies to internationalize their solutions, because we are facing at the moment that we are developing some solutions which are in line with a specific national framework, legal framework, but they don't comply with others. So this will harmonize the whole thing and open opportunities for us. About the challenges, so the implementation of the regulation is also has also some challenges, and the two first are very general ones. So the lack of awareness and on this water, the scarcity problem we are facing. This is slowly changing, but it's still this tend to think that water is kind of unlimited resource. And the lack of knowledge and this reluctancy concerning the use of reclaimed water for crops, for food products, because it's still somehow understood as a dirty and not safe resource to water our food. More specific challenges on the regulation are associated to the limits of the regulation is limits, so they are stricter than those previously imposed by the legal framework of several member states. So there will be a need, or there is a need to adapt the procedures, the monitoring and control system to this new scenario, which is established by the regulation. For example, whatever has to do with these risk management plans, which already Alfieri mentioned that are in the Annex 2 of the regulation. So, I mean, the work is still underway on our guideline, and I really hope we have it soon in order to see what we have to do. So the strict irrigation water quality requirements may be also an obstacle for achievement this main objective of the regulation, which is the promotion and the rapid and wide implementation of the water reuse projects. In the white paper, we were also, it has something about the need to define a little bit more in detail, or use the same quality standard for the different water sources, being conventional and non-conventional. So even though these quality, the strict quality requirements may be an obstacle, they could be also on the other hand, the first step towards a common source independent, whether they are coming from conventional or non-conventional origin, the quality standard for irrigation. This would support then in the future the use of reclaimed water, to our understanding, when the quality of this non-conventional water source is higher than the quality of conventional water sources. The risk-based criteria need to be developed to assess the required water quality with respect to different to context and several aspects. So possible changes in water quality occurring during the storage, transport, distribution, and use from the point of generation to the point of use need to be considered. And this is also quite challenging. Specifically in terms of microbiology, we need to assess bacteria, fungi, viruses present in water, and also to see whether they can survive or grow during the storage, what is happening in the crop, what is happening also in the soil. So all these are some challenges that we have identified in the implementation of the new regulation. So the water quality for irrigation should be assessed by taking into consideration several aspects, as I said, so from the agronomic point of view, plant productivity, from the podologic point of view, soil conservation, environmental, whatever has to do with these ecosystem services, economic, cost sustainability of the water reuse projects, for sure from the policy, the legal framework way. So there are many aspects to take into consideration regarding water quality, which is good. I mean, it's good to have this integrated approach, but this is quite challenging in the real implementation of the project. Regarding nutrients, the effective irrigation aspects should be also considered. Should be considered bearing in mind some other relevant directives, so like the water framework, the nitrates directive. So we have to keep an eye open on that. And also the soil quality needs to be monitored in case there is any accumulation of soil or other kind of compounds due to the use of water or the use of reclaimed water for our crops. The multi-actor approach. And so, I mean, it has been already said by Alfiri as well, and there are several actors in the whole value chain, and the risk assessments should be done in close cooperation in between, I mean, among all of them. So you have local water operators, you have the farmers, you have those that are in charge of the distribution, and not always this, let's say, communication is fluent. So you have to, in many cases, create this group, let's say, get to know how to work all together for the implementation of the project. And the current regulation is limited to treated urban wastewater. And we were also mentioning that I mean, some further steps should be taken to encompass treated industrial wastewater as well, or urban wastewater with high, let's say, inputs from industries to fully exploit in the near future the potential of the use of water for irrigation. So here is a summary also of the current barriers we have identified within the white paper for widespreading the application of water reuse practices. So first of all, we have this mixed availability of treatment technologies. This is mainly focused on the tertiary treatments we have already implemented in Europe. So we are moving from Central Northern Europe with about 30% of the municipal wastewater treatment plant that has no tertiary treatment. But this is increasing if we look at Eastern Europe to 40 and even higher in the southern of Europe, which is 50%. So the first thing is that, I mean, we need that efforts are made to extend the use, I mean, to execute, implement tertiary treatment in the member states. Another important area is related to the water tariff structure. So it is needed to define appropriate prices for water independent of its origin, could be conventional, non-conventional, and according to the production cost, the quality, the destination, the availability, and these prices should reflect a careful evaluation of internal costs, but also on the externalities, so whatever indirect benefits are associated to the implementation of water reuse project, and this is not always easy to do it. The institutional framework, fragmentation, so several member states will need to modify the internal legislation in order to match the EU regulation, and this for sure requires extra effort. And it's not only that they have to modify national legislation, and it's because from our point of view, it has to be done, I mean, as among different type of departments from the ministries, different kind of ministries. So it's a very transversal issue. So many different competencies should be taken into account, and this is always taking time, and it's not easy. And last but not least is social acceptances and important actions aimed at the stakeholder and general public as well are necessary to raise this awareness that the water is a limited source, that the water use should be considered and understood as an integral component of the water cycle. For barriers, we were also, I mean, there's also an evaluation following this political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal factor analysis, the special analysis. So an example has been included in the white paper. and that was performed within the H2020 project Map for Water in May 2017 in Tunisia, in the frame of a participatory workshop. And the stakeholders related to treated wastewater reuse were asked to identify barriers and drivers of the reuse of treated wastewater for irrigation. And this work was done, this kind of participatory workshop was following a two-step process. So first, there was the identification of the factors influencing the reuse implementation. And then it was a characterization of these factors that could be drivers or barriers, and the assessment of the relative influence through a cross-impact analysis. So I have included here one of the tables that are also in the white paper. You will see more details on that. But the stakeholders were asked to give, let's say, a weight in between 0 and 3 to the different barriers or factors, let's say, that could be a barrier or driver, in order to determine and rank the most important ones. So the results specifically for this cross-impact analysis carried out within Map for Water highlight that the main barriers for the implementation of water reuse projects are those related to the legal and institutional and economical ones. The policy and social barriers are also for sure very important ones. The analysis in this case reveals that those are either critical barriers, which are here, or which are the most important and complex barrier to address, let's say. But some other were more on reactive barriers here in this quadrant, for which a strategy that doesn't need to focus from the very beginning. Okay, so more information you will find in the white paper. We move on the white paper, and then we also have this overview of existing national legislation in member states for water reuse. In fact, the majority of the member states do not have currently any legislation or guidelines on water reuse. Here you will see a table like this for the countries identified, for which we have identified standards, which are Cyprus, France, Greece, Italy, and Spain, and also for Portugal, because they have some guidelines that the national government follows, let's say, for issuing any license or permission related to water reuse. So in some member state, guidelines for the reuse of water are being prepared or also exists, even though the countries do not have any binding legislation or quality standard associated, such as Belgium, Denmark, or Malta. That's why they are not included here. And again, there is no harmonization among the existing regulation, and this is an aspect to cover, as mentioned before. The paper also includes a summary of the new EU regulation. I'm not going to say anything about this because this was already addressed by Alfieri before, and also about the roles and responsibility of the different actors involved. And almost at the end, so the capacity building requirements, very important as well. So, and this was done together with this working group on human capital. So for the creation of a holistic and collaborative approach to human capital development, we need to empower people and organizations working on reuse, focusing on co-creation and also on co-responsibility with an integrated approach to knowledge, skills, and network. I was copying and pasting this paragraph because I think it's very, it's explaining itself. So there is a clear need to obtain, improve, and retain skills, knowledge, tool, equipment, and other sources to create this new system that will be able to broadly implement water reuse projects. And the capacity building has to be focused and done at different levels for operators, for educators, for academics, for managers. So it should be focused on the different key actors, these actors of the value chain, which are also included in the regulation. And the paper also includes some information about these needs identified within different workshops and interviews carried out by the Human Capital Working Group within the Water Europe, those that need to be really approached in the capacity building. And just finishing, so main conclusions. The use of drinking water is key. It's a key measure for climate change adaptation. Drinking water is still an untapped resource and is essential for life and for economic development. The implementation of reuse projects is truly aligned with EU and global strategies, being the circular economy strategy, sustainable development goals, apart from the legal framework already mentioned. The regulation is a powerful tool and driver to spread the butane water use in Europe and provide this harmonized framework to also increase the user and consumer confidence. The regulation proposes stringent standards for drinking water quality compared to those of conventional water resources. So some adaptation is needed, and we will need also to make some effort and investment in this infrastructure mentioned in the next point. That needs to be, let's say, built. Otherwise, we will not be able to implement the water reuse project following or, let's say, complying with this new regulation. Adequate tariff and pricing structure is needed to ensure this financial feasibility for infrastructure, for monitoring, for the risk management, the implementation. Very relevant again, as well. Governance schemes are to be adapted to issue licenses and permissions and to monitor compliance. The regulations set the conditions, but do not force to reuse, even though you have to justify and motivate why you are not, let's say, promoting in your member state the reuse project. It's not forcing you to do it. So the water reuse needs to be a priority at local, regional, and national level. Otherwise, I mean, maybe the expectation on the water reuse implementation are not achieved. Capacity building is needed for the new qualified staff to implement the reuse project. Digitalization for transparent, real-time measuring and monitoring data is needed. And this is very, very important to allow the users, the different key actors of the value chain, to become more efficient, sustainable, and confidence on these water projects. And last but not least, the Europe water security and the one in the different member states is truly associated to the capacity to implement these large-scale wastewater reuse projects, lowering the impact in the footprint, the water footprint of the dairy agricultural sectors. I'm sorry, I was trying to run, Rafa. So thank you very much. And open for questions in the round table, sorry.
It's fine. Yeah, thank you very much for this interesting presentation, Antonia. It's a lot of work we did in the white paper, so it's really difficult to summarize. Maybe we can have some time if there is anyone in the public, in the audience, to have questions directly to Antonia or Alfieri. If not, we will have a round table at the end. So yeah, you can raise your hand or write in the chat. Let me check, because we do have one question in the chat. Yeah, for both Antonia and Alfieri, a question from the LinkedIn chat. Do you have any concrete definition for water reused that could be used in future legislation?
Maybe this is more for Alfieri. I don't know. I mean, they said we were right, Alfieri.
It's not fair. However, it's a tricky question, because water use indeed entails a number of activities, and it is difficult to provide the general definition, because we are talking now here of water use for a specific application. This is a specific water coming from the treatment of urban wastewaters, and for a specific application, which is mostly irrigation of crops. So we are in a more, say, narrow and defined environment here. Generally speaking, I believe it's difficult to provide a general definition of water use, because water use applies to industry, water use applies to drinking water as well, and in the States is pretty much developed. Water use can be direct or indirect,
Yep.
as we all know. So there are lots of different, say, possible applications and the interpretations of the water use as a concept. So
maybe I can add something on this, but as you said, this regulation is very specific for water reuse. When we are talking about urban wastewater and the reuse, it's focused on agriculture, even if it's food or not food products. But I guess, I mean, for the specific legislation, normally you have a definition at the beginning. So in the context of a specific legislation, you will have at the beginning a definition of what this legislation means when talking about water reuse. And I think, as Alfiri said, it's very broad. So it's difficult to have a common understanding. I would say that water that are not coming from conventional sources are being treated and bring it to a quality that is enough to be reused in several
I would
like this.
I would like I would just to add a comment to this, that it was initially the word wastewater was used, but then it's been agreed that water is water after all. So water is the source, water is the waste, and water is the end of waste recovery resources. So this is why we are not speaking anymore of wastewater reuse or treated wastewater reuse, but we are dealing with water reuse. Yeah. So water is one. It's like air. Air is one, can be more or less polluted, but it is one. And water is one, independent of the source and the level of pollution. This is my personal opinion.
Yeah. So this was kind of open the melon.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for this interesting discussion. We move forward to our next speaker, but the chat is open for questions, so we can, let's say, rescue more questions for the roundtable. But now we move on with our next speaker, Valentina Bastino. She's a policy officer of the European Commission at DG Environment, and Valentina will talk now about the application of the water reuse regulation. So it's very important for us to have the view of someone from the European Commission involved in this process. So Valentina, thank you very much for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm now going to try to share my screen, so bear with me for a second. Do you see anything?
Yes, we can see the presentation. It's not in the presentation mode. We see it. Maybe
there's just a slight delay.
Maybe.
Maybe Valentina can talk about this water reuse definition.
I can. Do you?
It seems not to be an easy question. Definitions are always tricky.
Yeah,
because it's difficult to set boundaries, right?
Indeed. Just is it now in presentation mode? Because it appears in presentation mode in mine, and
not yet.
No,
not yet. No.
Oh, very strange.
Maybe you stop sharing and reshare again, please.
I can try that. So, and show, stop share. Okay, share screen. Is it now showing?
Yeah.
Great. Sorry. Clearly my technological skills are not quite up to
but
standard.
At the same time, could you please hide The box on the right, yes.
Gone?
Perfect, absolutely perfect. Thank you.
Excellent.
Fully okay. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I will start with my presentation, and I'll try to introduce a little mention of or a little comment on the definition as I go along. So I've been asked to present something about the forthcoming guidelines for the application of the rules. The water reuse regulation indeed requires the Commission to produce, in cooperation with Member States, guidelines to aid the Member States in applying the new rules that will come into application next year in June 2023, as mentioned by Alfieri earlier. On my first slide, I put a couple of elements. In the slides that will follow, you will probably recognize things that have already been mentioned, so I will skip or be extremely quick about it. Basically, the aim of the water reuse regulation is to encourage the uptake of water reuse and make the best possible use of its potential in Europe to help address water scarcity and drought while safeguarding public health and the environment. And I take this occasion to actually make a little precision about what is the aim of this regulation. I heard earlier mentions of increasing supply of water, about additional water resources, and I feel compelled now to say that we actually see water reuse as a tool that can be used within the context of integrated water management to better adapt to climate change, to make a more efficient use of resources. But we see this rather than additional water sources, we rather see them as alternative water resources that can relieve pressure on water bodies which are suffering, as we have seen in the Po River images, just to mention one example that is very much in the news these days, especially in Italy. So the advantage is to provide an alternative water supply and, very importantly, a reliable alternative water supplies for the farmers that are better able to know on how much water they will be able to count independently of the moment of the year or of the season. As mentioned earlier, the legislation is in force since June last year, but the rules will apply only as of 26 June 2023. That was to give the member states time to adapt and adapt their legislations. I am not going to run through this slide again. It's basically repeating a little bit what Alfieri has mentioned about the main provisions of the regulation and about the minimum requirements and the fact that there's obligations to develop a risk management plan for each water reuse projects. And I have put on this slide, just by way of reminders, what are the main quality parameters that are offered by the legislation, both in terms of water quality and monitoring parameters. And a reminder of the fact that there's 4 different water quality classes, just by way of better explaining where these parameters came from. This work was based on a JRC. The JRC is the Joint Research Center of the European Commission that has prepared a technical study that drew from different sources, including the World Health Organization's guidelines for the reuse of treated wastewater, the Australian guidance for the reuse, and other internationally recognized standards, including the ISO standards in this area. And as mentioned, there's an annex in the regulation that proposes 11 key elements of risk management that must be taken into consideration when drawing a risk management plan. In this instance, I would like also to provide a little precision, which is the fact that the system proposed by this regulation is on purpose very flexible in terms of administration, let's say. It does require that a risk management is established, and the competent authorities have the ultimate responsibility to make sure that that risk management plan is established. But in terms of who exactly drafts the plan and who exactly requires or submits an application for a permit really depends very much on the choices made at national level. There are member states that were mentioned earlier that already have systems in place, and therefore the regulation was designed to be able to accommodate these systems and avoiding a complete overhaul when not necessary. Plus, different member states have got different structures in terms of administration, so what system might work for one member state might be unsuitable for another. When it comes to the looming deadline of the start of the application of the rules next year, we're aware of the fact that the member states, or several member states, are very busy preparing for the application. The member states already doing water reuse are reviewing or adapting in some way their existing legislation to make sure they comply with the water reuse regulation. Other member states are considering how to set up the system, or are considering perhaps submitting decisions to not authorize for the time being water reuse on their territory or part of their territory. As I mentioned, the Article 1115 of the regulation mandates that the Commission has to establish guidelines to support the application of the rules. We have been working on it in the past few months, very closely with the working group on water reuse. Alfieri mentioned the ad hoc task group on water reuse, which had the preparation of the regulation. Since the regulation came into force, that group has been transformed into a permanent working group of the Common Implementation Strategy of the water policy, and this group was closely involved in drafting the guidelines, publication of which is forthcoming. So these guidelines will be formally called a Commission notice. A Commission notice is nothing more than a specific type of Commission communication, which intends to clarify or provide an interpretation of rules that are set in legislation. So it is not a legal document, but it does provide an explanation and a clarification of rules that are legally binding. The Commission notice that will be published is structured around two main chapters. The regulation, we saw it as structured around more general and administrative obligations, the more policy part, if you want, while there's quite a hefty part that has to do with risk management, validation, monitoring, and all aspects which are really quite technical and not always regulated in very many details. And we felt it was useful to follow this kind of structure also in the Commission notice. What does the notice do? Well, provides explanations of the rules, and rather importantly, I believe, it introduces several examples that illustrates the rules. Sometimes talking about rules and about how to implement can become a little abstract. We thought it was useful to provide real cases or theoretical cases that could illustrate exactly what was in the mind of the legislator when developing the regulation. I have collected here on this slide the main heading of what is chapter 2 of these guidelines. Basically, it focuses on the scope, on the role of the competent authorities and of contact points. It describes what are the responsible parties in a water reuse system, something about permits, compliance checks, penalties, and also very importantly about awareness raising and information sharing. We heard from previous speakers how this can be sometimes a barrier to the deployment of water reuse, so it is an important aspect that deserves attention. When it comes to chapter 2, in particular when it comes to the scope, the Commission notice proposes clarifications on how Article 2.2 decisions should be made and submitted to the Commission and justified. Just by way of a reminder, the Article 2.2 is about the possibility for member states to decide that water reuse is not appropriate in their territory or in part of their territory, which might mean that effectively water reuse is banned. That doesn't mean, however, that the regulation in its entirety doesn't apply. There will be some general application, provisions. I apologize, there's a mistake in the slide. So some general provisions that will still be applicable. These are, for example, the management of research or pilot projects, for example, that might still occur even if water reuse more in general is banned. It's to do with penalties to make sure that if you ban water reuse, say, in a part of your country, then in the other areas it's still applied according to the rules, and so on. The second chapter also includes sections on the roles and responsibilities of the competent authorities, of the contact points, and of all the responsible parties. Responsible parties is basically it's a policy term which is defined in the regulation, and it involves the operator of the wastewater treatment plants, the authorities that may have a stake in a project, the users, and it could be also the storage operators or the distribution operators, or for example, also other parties that could appear in certain water reuse schemes. The chapter then provides further information on permits and on compliance checks and penalties, although these are areas where, again, the member states have quite some flexibility in developing the system that works for them, provided that they meet some minimum requirements set out in the legislation, and some information about the awareness raising and the needs for information sharing set by the regulation. Next, the Commission notice has a whole chapter dedicated to technical aspects. This is by far the biggest in terms of volume of pages part of the guidelines, and it's divided into 3 main subchapters to do with risk management, the types of crops and reclaimed water classes, and the validation monitoring. A bit more in details about the content of these sub-chapters. Well, when it comes to the risk management approach, there's a section that provides some information on the administrative setup. Administrative is in inverted comma because I used it as a rather broad term, not just about the administrations, but also the sort of the policy setup that goes with it. So it's not just to do with the authorities, for example. And then there's different sections that clarify each and every one of the key risk management elements of Annex 2, together with some examples. There's then a section about types of crops and reclaimed water classes. As we mentioned earlier in earlier presentations as well, the regulation takes a fit for purpose approach. Therefore, there's different water quality classes that can be matched to different types of crops. However, it's not that at one crop corresponds necessarily one quality of water. There could be a combination of irrigation methods or the use, for example, of barriers or other preventive measures that can allow a different choices when it comes to the appropriate quality of water, depending on how the crop is treated. And examples, again, are proposed in this area, which in some cases has created some confusions with our counterparts in the national administrations. And finally, there's a chapter on validation monitoring, basically description of a possible approach to putting together a validation protocol, knowing again that there's some elements of discretion for the member states to see what protocol might best fit the way their water reuse schemes are structured, as well as examples of possible validation protocols. Finally, as I mentioned, we considered the provisions of examples as a useful element to aid in the understanding of the rules. And we ended up with 5 annexes dealing with different aspects, and many of these annexes actually contain examples that were quite extensively developed, providing a sort of aid to the authorities or to the parties involved, and giving an illustration of the sort of analysis that we would expect to occur when a water reuse system is set up, when choices are made as to what quality of water is appropriate for the crops in an area. So we hope that these annexes will be considered useful by the readers. With this, I come to the end of my presentation. I just copy-pasted on this slide the general link on the Commission website where you can find all sorts of material on water use, including the background to the legislation and other useful documents. And on this page, the notice will most likely appear beside being published then officially in the official journal of the European Union. And with this, I close my presentation. And as I do so, I realize that I actually not mentioned anything about the definition of water reuse, so I might steal another minute of your time to comment a little bit on that, only to say that I do agree with Alfieri and Antonia. Water reuse is using water again and again if needed. So it's very broad and general concept. So I fully agree with the fact that depending on what exactly you're trying to regulate, you will need to define a specific, if not water reuse itself, but define the waters that you're using. So in the case of the water reuse regulation, the choice was made to focus on one source of water, which is treated urban wastewater according to the regulation, the Directive on Urban Wastewater Treatment, and for a specific purpose, agricultural irrigation. So the regulation doesn't actually define water reuse. It defines rather reclaimed water, which is the water resulting from this further treatment. So I think it would be difficult to come with a very meaningful general definition, because ultimately it will really depend on what you're talking about. If it's industrial water reuse in an industrial installation for cooling or something, it might be defined in a slightly different way. And I believe it is generally a concept which is fairly well established in the sector, at least, that doesn't need a specific, very general definition. That's all that I wanted to add on what Alfieri and Antonia have said already. Thank you so much for your attention, and any question, of course, I'm available.
Thanks a lot, Valentina. It was very interesting presentation. I do have a question, maybe a more difficult question than the one related to the definition, which is, you said the guidelines are forthcoming. So my question is, what do you mean with that? When we can expect those guidelines? During the summer, after
soon.
The summer, soon?
I
see it was a difficult question.
No, to be very open with you, the notice is ready. It's just undergoing the internal process, and it needs to be translated in every EU official language. The translations are ongoing, and when the translations will be finalized, it will be a matter of days for the College of Commissioners to adopt. So I'm unable to tell you an exact date, but it really is forthcoming. We're talking a couple of weeks, 3-4 weeks, something like that.
Okay, good.
So I'm unable to say anything more precisely than that, but it is,
but it's good. It was a concrete response. Very much appreciated. Thank you very much. There is another interesting question in the chat from Luca Gialdini, and it's about the micro and nanoplastics. It's how this is gonna be dealt by the authorities. And I would like to add about, in general, micropollutants, those standards that are not in this table too of monitoring parameters, but that are relevant somehow. What can you say?
Yes, I can draw your attention to Annex 2 of the regulation, which sets out all the key elements of risk management, where basically the point of the risk assessment is to really have a tailor-made approach to each specific water reuse. So while E. coli will be a problem for human health, regardless of whether you are in Helsinki or in Madrid or Murcia, there are some elements that are probably more specifically linked to a certain specific area. So for example, the pollution from, say, a presence of pharmaceutical industry that may lead to the fact that on the urban wastewaters, some waters from these sectors is part of the mixture, carrying a load of possible compounds of emerging concern. So the risk management is there precisely to evaluate in each specific case whether there is a need for further or more stringent or different standards to address issues that are specific to that area. And this is the case, for example, for there's a list of possible elements that might be subject to more stringent requirements, including heavy metals, pesticides, disinfection by products, pharmaceuticals, and other substances of emerging concern, including micropollutants and microplastics. I was just reading now from the annex. So these elements, while they're not regulated yet, at least at European level, need to be part of the equation when developing a risk management plan for a specific water reuse.
Okay, so we understand this will be also further explained in these guidelines for risk management, how this shall be considered.
Yes, there's some further explanations. I just take this occasion also to clarify a little, just in case there's some confusion, because Alfieri has mentioned guidelines specific to risk assessment. So I just would like to distinguish there's two different products. So the one that will be coming out and be adopted soon is more in general guidelines about the application of the rules. It does have quite a hefty chapter on risk management, but it is not the specific delegated act. It's just to explain what are the rules. We have started, we were quite early in the process, but we will need to accelerate on this work in the months to come to work specifically on specifications for risk management. I expect that this delegated act will follow the structure of or the general sort of conceptual thrust that we set out in the guidelines, but it will go into further specifics, and that will be legally binding. So I just wanted to clarify this in case anyone was confused by the use of the same word guidelines for both.
Great, that was very clear, and I think very important to clarify that the need of that there are two different products, two different documents that will be delivered by European Commission. Okay, so thank you very much. I see there are no more questions. Thanks, Valentina.
If there's anything, I'm available at a later stage by mail or anything.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Great. So we now move to our next presentation. It will be provided by Bernd Gaulik, who is portfolio leader water quality. He works in the Joint Research Center in ISPRA, and unfortunately he cannot be with us today, but he kindly sent a recorded presentation. With us, we have his colleague Caterina Cacchiatori. She's a scientific officer in the European Commission, also working in the Joint Research Center in ISPRA. So they are having a role in the development of these guidelines specific for risk management. So this presentation is very linked with the previous question that was being clarified by Valentina. And so we will hear first the video of Bernd Gaulik. Anka, maybe you can give us some support with the video. Good.
You see it in full screen?
Yes, we see perfectly.
Perfect.
You can go ahead.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and apologies for not being present, connected online. Unfortunately, for private business, I was obliged to fly urgently to the Netherlands, so I decided to record this presentation. My name is Bernd Gaulik, and I'm working in the European Commission Science Service, the JRC. In the next few minutes, I will walk you through the risk management approach within the regulation 2020/741. But what you are going to see is, of course, the result of a collective effort based on experience of the past and technologies of the future. It is the knowledge that has been compiled by my team. First of all, I would like to mention and thank gratefully Roberta Maffetone for having overseen the developments in the recent year. Caterina Cacciatori, who introduced this presentation, and my entire team, as well as all the numerous contributors, some of them are connected today, who made all this possible. Let me start, however, first by looking on water reuse from a little bit different perspective. It's not only our economy is circular, but also fields in Ukraine are circular, which is quite interesting. I choose this picture to open the presentation in order to reflect a moment on what's happening in this very moment, how important suddenly food security has become for the whole planet, and what role water reuse and irrigation practices will have in this. When it comes to water reuse in Europe, we face the situation that basically we have to reconcile two very different standpoints. We have on one side the reclaimers who are interested to reuse treated wastewater as much as possible, as long as it is safe. And on the other side, we have the protectors, which emphasize very much potential risks and the precautionary principle. None of them is right, none of them is wrong. We have to bring both standpoints together, and this is what we tried to do. The reclaimers look very much on, well, it's enough that the water is safe to be reused, and then it's good to go ahead with the technology. The protectors look very much above all on the environmental protection aspects and what may happen if we bring in risks or we take away water from the environmental flows. The reclaimers, as I said before, are very much concerned about food security and food supply, so safe food for all. Whereas the protectors look very much on the impact in terms of greener agriculture or soil biodiversity. From a reclaimer perspective, what is very important in this context is, of course, that we mitigate pathogen spread and risks arising from pathogens, in particular on the produce. From an environmental perspective, from the protectors' view, we look very much on the One Health approach, health for all. For reclaimers, pollutants of emerging concern or contaminants of emerging concern can be handled on a very pragmatic approach, for instance by applying a concept of the allowable daily intake. For the reclaimers, for the protectors, we look very much on combined effect and have a very precautionary approach. Now this is very important to bear in mind for what's going to come. In order to promote water reuse in Europe, the four actors of societies which are listed in this slide have to come together. Research and academia making a practice available and safe, the public administration defining the legal framework, as we did with the water reuse regulation. The private sector and stakeholders, so farmers and water utilities, have to make this financially viable and interesting. And at the end of the day, the citizen has to be convinced that this is a safe practice and a way to go. Now, all this is very important, but if you remember the slide before, we see that there is a big difference depending on where you live. Somebody in Germany perceives water reuse completely different than somebody living in Spain. So the cultural element is an essential fifth element which we have to bear in mind and we have to address at all occasions, in all countries, in all places. Now, what was the role of the Commission Science Service, the Joint Research Center, in developing this framework? Well, it all started actually with the JSC technical report on risk management for agricultural irrigation in the EU, which some of you remember very well. Article 11.5 of the water reuse regulation states that the Commission shall, in consultation with member states, establish guidelines. And Article 5 of the same regulation empowered the Commission to adopt delegated acts in order to adapt to technical and scientific progress, and in particular regarding key elements of risk management as set out in Annex 1 of the regulation. In Article 11, the Commission is authorized to lay down detailed rules regarding the format and presentation of information in an implementing act. And generally, the JSC was and is very instrumental in promoting water reuse in Europe and collecting best practices. Now, the development of the guidelines followed the following process. Upon the adoption of the water reuse regulation, we organized a series of technical workshops on risk management, in which we collected case studies on EU water reuse systems and promoted the exchange of best practice and knowledge on doing so. We then also organized with the ad hoc group on water reuse under the Common Implementation Strategy a series of consultations and meetings in which the draft guidance were discussed, commented, annotated, we replied to the comments, integrated and what have you. So it went a little bit back and forth. And last but not least, an inter-service consultation took place in April in order to collect the opinions from other EC directorates. And now what is imminent in the forthcoming weeks is the publication indeed of the guidelines via the Commission notice and of course the parallel publication of the JSC technical report underlying the science basis of this. So the JSC technical report, yes, another one, establishes on how the water reuse management should be addressed. As the previous report leading to Annex 2, it is based on established guidelines and standards. We mention here some of them, the WHO guidelines, very important for us, the Australian guidelines, as well as the ISO framework. And I can only echo the importance of the demonstration project DemoWare, which was really a huge help in bringing all this on track. It includes several examples and methodologies. For instance, we illustrate qualitative health risk assessment, quantitative health risk assessment, and how environmental risk assessment on freshwater resources can be addressed. And in total, we included 14 case studies with examples collected during a series of workshops which we organized. This in particular to show that what we are proposing here can be encountered in the real life, and that what we are proposing has undergone a certain ruggedness testing. This is very important for us. What the water reuse case studies actually are spread very nicely across Europe, starting from Northern Europe in the Netherlands and Germany. Quite a number of case studies were presented to us from the different regions in northern, central and south of Italy. And of course, Spain and Portugal contributed to this. Quite interestingly, we had also an example from Malta and from Cyprus, which are really the countries, the forerunner countries when it comes to the application. These case studies contain example of risk management plans, show on how the health and environmental risk assessment was addressed, and it basically forms a collection of best practice. A collection which, by the way, we intend to continue in order to keep the dialogue alive, and we found this engagement very, very productive, useful, not only for us in the Commission, who actually learned a lot, but also generally for the community in large, exchanging different information. Now, the suggested approach in the risk management implication follows very much an idea which has been brought on track by the DemoWare project. It is organized and clustered in different modules, which you see here on the left side. The module 1 includes the description of the entire water reuse system to its final use, and it has also the important task to define the system boundaries, site-specific requirements, characterization of environmental matrix to be addressed, and indeed the setup of the team who has to manage and oversee all this. Module 2 is actually really the core part when it comes to risk assessment. It is there where we identify health and environmental hazards, exposure routes, and targets. We also provide instruction on the characterization of risks and the identification of measures to reduce it, which is then leading to module 3, where we are addressing that everything what we propose and going to implement is monitored correctly on a routine basis, that we have quality routines, quality assurance routines in place, and that we actually also know what we do in case of emergencies, which is then indeed addressed in module 4, where we have the protocols of emergencies and where we talk a lot about communication and engagement as well. As I said before, I can only echo that this was inspired by an FP7 project, DemoWare, and I would like to particularly thank our colleagues from EURECAD in Spain and in KWR in the Netherlands for having worked with us in shaping this in the initial phase. And it shows actually that if we pay attention to the outcome of research projects, that we can have a viable and tangible direct impact on subsequent EU legislation. The risk management boundaries in our approach are addressed in a way that they combined address health risks and environmental risks from the wastewater treatment plant as, let's say, the zero reference from which we start, down to the consumer. Of course, the consumer and distribution chain, as well as the exposed bystanders and workers, are relevant for the health risk assessment, whereas the irrigated area, the interaction between soil, water, and atmosphere and wildlife is very important for the environmental risk assessment. The exposure groups and targets we took into consideration are shown on this slide. Of course, you have always to go through this process and not take it for granted, because every site is specific. Every water reuse scheme has different vulnerabilities and targets. So what you see here is a schematic view, but from the case studies we have seen that a lot of brain goes into this process, and indeed exposure groups and compartments, including local communities, workers, consumers, or vulnerable groups, are addressed very carefully. The environmental hazards and exposed environment follow very much the water acquis and how the different pieces of EU legislation interact. As a matter of fact, some of you may know it, I fancy very much the link to the River Basin Management Plan, because water reuse schemes, in particular for irrigation, have always to be seen as part of the bigger picture. Integrated water management is not only pushing for water reuse, it means that we have to understand where the environmental flows are and decide on which option for a specific area is the best one. The hazard identification process, of course, requires that we carefully characterize the wastewater, that we have a very thorough understanding of the applicable legislation and the potential environments at exposure and route of exposures. Now, I mentioned before in the title that the experience of the past is actually something on which we are building. And this is indeed something where the countries who have been doing water reuse had a very important role in assisting in the development of the guidelines. We have safe water reuse practices for more than 2 decades in the Mediterranean, and this experience not only consists in scientific knowledge which has been channeled to it, but it is simply a guarantee that what we are proposing here is ensuring a safe reuse of water. The environmental risk assessment, of course, addresses quite a number of different compartments and interactions between the compartments. Soil acidification, soil salinization are among the most known and well characterized risks when it comes to water reuse, but also the impact on soil functions and biodiversity has to be of interest, because it's a very precious good, sometimes underestimated, and luckily the European Soil Framework is going to help us very much indeed to improve the situation here. Vegetation and animal is something of great concern in the risk assessment, and I'm particularly proud that we developed indeed quite a number of additional requirements when it comes to wildlife and animal health welfare in collaboration and upon the feedback received from the European Food and Safety Authority in Parma. Well, water goes without saying. The water acquis, I mentioned it already, surface water, groundwater, and critical areas have to be taken into consideration. And last but not least, a word or two are due in an environmental risk assessment on particular aerosol formation and volatilization, but also generally a reflection about greenhouse gases and energy consumption and airborne problems are relevant indeed. The risk assessment methodologies are different ones. I have here an example from our report which shows very much on how we addressed the risk of exposure to groundwater. I don't walk you now through the slide, but you see basically we address the issue of infiltration to groundwater, if it's there, if it's not there, how strong it is, and basically how vulnerable is the underlying aquifer to receive this infiltration. So of course, shallow aquifers or aquifers which have no clay protection are more vulnerable than, for instance, aquifers which are very deep and protected with a clay layer above them. And from this you arrive on a qualitative risk assessment approach, which is also very much based again on the ISO standard on these risk classes. In the entire management concept, the multi-barrier concept is really something that accompanied the development of the risk management framework. So you see in this graphic the chain of pollutants or pressures on the system from the wastewater treatment plant to the point of application. And you see that the multi-barrier concept indeed is a combination of technological and non-technological measures in order to reduce possible risks, and in combination with critical control points and surveillance at these critical control points, we ensure that the barriers are very effective. Again, this is based on an ISO standard, ISO 60075 Part 2. We discuss in the report also suggested barriers with specific log reductions and a number of barriers to apply for different type of crops, and give examples again on how this should be put into practice. The multi-barrier approach indeed requires a combination of barriers, the consideration of crops and quality, water quality classes based on what you're going to do and the irrigation technology you're going to apply. I show here a very nice example. For those of you who are in the field, they are very much familiar with this. Generally, I think the water reuse framework provided reflects the state of the art. It is the best we can do. It allows at the same time to establish a European, almost global framework to ensure a safe reuse of treated wastewater, but it also allows to act at local level to implement it and consider the particular needs and requirements in situ. With this, I come to the closure of my presentation, and I want to close linking to the first picture I showed to you from Ukraine, the circular fields. This is a picture taken 2 years ago on River Rhine in Germany. It shows you the dramatic situation which we experience more and more, almost regularly now every summer, also in parts of Europe so far spared by droughts. In this very moment in Italy, we have communities who have to start regulating drinking water supply because River Po has not enough water. We don't know yet the damage on the northern Italian agriculture, but we understand that every drop of water has its value more than ever. And the food prices and the food crisis triggered by the war in Ukraine make us understand that we have to protect our food supply systems, first of all, in the European Union. Let me conclude with the remark that there is not anything like wastewater. There's only one water. And the time to waste this is over. And with this, thank you very much for your attention. Here you have our contact details. My colleague Katharina stays with us. She will take eventually questions and put you in contact with Roberta and myself. And thank you very much indeed for having me with you, even if it's only recorded. Thank you very much indeed, and bye-bye.
Okay. Well, thank you, so Katerina, for being with us. It seems that Bernd was aware of our discussions with Alfieri, and it was very much connected with this discussion on the definitions and so on. Okay, I see there are no questions in the chat. I may have one question for you, Katerina, about risk management plans. It was said before by Valentina that risk management, it's supposed to be somehow flexible. So, for example, when we talk about micropollutants or microplastics, it depends on the situation. So when there is a risk or not. But my question is, how this is going to be monitored, how we can be sure that whenever it's decided that micropollutants are not relevant in a certain case study, it's based on scientific background, or it's more a political decision. So is there any way to monitor or to ensure that there is a scientific background for this?
So I will try to reply to your question. In case I don't fulfill it, then you might contact Bernd and Roberta. But as far as I understand, the identification of additional risk or hazard that then needs to be let's say brings to other regulations that are listed in the annex, it has to be proved scientifically.
Okay.
So there is a need to prove that, for example, an area is suffering from nitrate contaminations, and then based on this, then the nitrate regulations need to be applied and let's say complied to. So there needs to be a scientific proof. It cannot just be based on
and do you know who monitors that? Because there will be always the incentive of trying to not monitor so much, because finally this implies cost and human resources and so on. So for users, maybe less control is more simple. So the incentive will be to go to less controls. How we ensure that this scientific basis is really applicable? Is this something it will be somehow explained in the regulations, or?
There is a first in the first assessment, key risk management element. There is a part that addresses this definition of roles and responsibility throughout the whole water reuse chain.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I see now another questions. The guidelines are very concrete and specific concerning pathogens, but there is not so much information on contaminants of emerging concern. Is more concrete information coming on that? Yeah, I think this was more or less answered before by Valentina, but maybe you can say something.
Yeah, so I can say in Annex 2 again, there is a reference to the EQS of the European Commission. So that would be and other regulations and directives. So that would address the problem of contaminants of emerging concern.
Okay. Good. Okay, so if there are no more questions, or if you have questions in mind, we are now having some time with all the speakers together to start a discussion. So feel free to include questions in your chat. If not, I did a little bit of homework and have some questions for them. So my first questions to all of you, it's well, we have seen in this workshop many of the benefits of the European regulation. It's a harmonized instrument, but also there are some barriers, as we have identified in the white paper. But so generally, how do we do to maximize the benefits and overcome these barriers? What should be the strategy for implementation of the regulation? Any ideas? Maybe Alfieri, you can start.
Yeah, well, it is difficult to say to think of strategies. Basically, what it is required now at the phase of implementation of the regulation is concrete cooperation by national governments. So some of the national governments have moved already and are moving towards the adaptation of national legislations where they exist, or to the say, establishing national instruments to adapt to the new regulation entering into force. Some others are a little bit late, and I have to admit that Italy, for instance, is a bit late in this. There's no as far as I know, there is no much activity in this respect, but the deadline is close, and so when we get to next June 2023, then if the regulation is not properly applied, meaning that reuse practices have to undergo water use risk management plans, and the operators are responsible for monitoring and all these nice things that are written in the regulation. If this is not done, then the risk is of sanctions by the EC, I believe. And so in this moment, I think there is the need for a strong involvement by national governments, and of course they have to be involved in the application of the regulation. This is in general terms. Then there are a lot of issues related to awareness raising, to communication to the general public and to the users, etc. But we have already talked about this, and this, I think, they come after once the instrument is in application.
Okay.
Maybe I can say something also on that. So I think that I mean, it's difficult, as Fieri mentioned, to say which are the strategies that would support this the implementation, overcome the current barriers we have been talking about during the whole afternoon. I think because I mean the strategy will depend on the different situations. Let's say we don't have the same starting point in the different countries. So I mean, it's coming. For example, technology is there. Technology is developed. Technology can be implemented, but we need to know, let's say, the current wastewater treatment capacity the country has, the member state has, and which kind of treatments, for example, they are using. As I was mentioning also that they're not, I mean, in a high percentage, at least in the south, 50% of the plants, they don't have tertiary treatment. So in order to be ready for the implementation of the water reuse project, there is a lot of work to be done before. And in order to have this, let's say, to start with the same situation and then get the same speed, let's say, during the implementation of the regulation. So I think technology and the infrastructure an important barrier. So the strategies in the countries should focus on, I mean, making available the budget and the means and the permissions and everything in order to get ready for next year and implement as much as possible and increase the capacity. Let's say update our wastewater treatment plants. That could be one pillar of the strategies. Governance is key as well. So we have a situation in Spain that, depending on the region, even though we are all, let's say, in the same country and with the same legislation, we have very different, let's say, amount or percentage of waste, urban wastewater in this case, being treated for its reuse in agriculture, so for producing this reclaimed water. And this is a question of political commitment, and this is a question of the demand from the stakeholders. And this would be also another important pillar to build a specific strategy depending on the situation. As I said before, stakeholder engagement and this communication and cooperation, let's say channels and structure, are also key. So there's another, I mean, there's a lot of room also to work on that. There are more things, but
yeah. Okay, thank you, Antonia. Caterina, what do you think we need to maximize the benefits of this regulation and overcome barriers?
Maybe related to the last point that was raised regarding communication and the engagement of all stakeholders. I guess it's important also from the JRC, from the Commission, that the technical report, for example, that goes into the case studies that were produced, and so it can be it's very useful information for practical suggestions and how to do it. Then it needs to be communicated in a way and spread, and this is a part of really sharing knowledge and promote also maybe the cultural change that Bernd was referring to, because if that doesn't happen, then it's difficult and that this would or will be accepted soon, and we need to that it happens fast, really, because we see that the issues are of water scarcities, as it has been mentioned many times today, are very current, and so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Communication is essential. This and you brought to my mind something that we experienced here in Spain in some of the projects we have with water reuse, and it's about the benefits of the nutrients contained in the water. We are talking about water and then the need how to cope with water scarcity, but one of the benefits of using reclaimed water is that it has nutrients inside, so it will potentially reduce the need of fertilizers. So our experience in Spain is that even those farmers using reclaimed water tend to use the same amount of fertilizers that when they are using. So my question, and I see the answer in your faces, is in Italy or in the other countries you are working with, is it the same situation? Farmers are using the same amount of fertilizers and therefore not taking advantage of these nutrient contents? Yeah. Alfieri, you have the same feeling, I guess.
Yes, Rafa, indeed, farmers are not easy to change in their habits. So it takes a lot of work to convince them that practices can be modified, and normally these are the outcome of generations of practices that have been herited from and so it is difficult. And the other aspect is that chemical fertilizers are very cheap. So this is more or less the same problem with water. It is difficult to move to another source of water if the conventional one is so cheap. So there is work to be done in the definition of tariffs, not only for water, but also for chemical fertilizers, in my opinion. Of course, chemical fertilizer is more tough because it's the chemical industry is involved. So it's difficult to touch the interest of chemical industry. But still, if it is a marginal difference between using and not using chemical fertilizers, they will keep using them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I have a minute, Rafa, before you wrap up the event. But I think chemical fertilizers are cheap, but the prices are getting, are increasing. So this would somehow support maybe the understanding from the farmers of the potentiality of the reclaimed water in terms of fertilization, not only irrigation, but also fertilization potential, sorry. So that may help. It's true that the water is so cheap that I'm not saying that the water should be expensive, but at least the tariff and the prices should consider whatever is needed to make this water available for the user. Talking about these nutrients, we are at Biofuel working in a kind of say solution to show the fertilizing potential of the waste, the treated wastewater, the reclaimed waters. And this could also be, let's say, aligned with this, that if you are using reclaimed water, if there is a fertilizing potential in the water and it's being fertilized with chemical fertilizer, the same, we are creating another problem, because we are over fertilizing. So these kind of tools being developed by many entities and different tools to show this potential are also very, very relevant, and will, from my point of view, support the implementation of the regulation as well.
Very good. Well, it's time to conclude. I think we could be talking for hours about this very interesting topic. For me, it was a pleasure to have you all. Very interesting discussions, especially in this very hot topic of the water reuse regulation. We only have 1 year ahead to have the regulation compulsory. Now we are in the adaptation process, so all the insights we got from the different speakers are very relevant. Thank you very much for being here, and also thanks to Water Europe for allowing us to organize this workshop. And that's it from my side. I don't know if you want to say something just as a conclusion to wrap up and finalize the event.
Oh, just please, Antonio, go ahead.
Yeah, just to remind you all that the white paper will be published soon. And I would like to thank you also, Water Europe, and all the contributors to the white paper. It has been a long work, a lot of work, but I think it's really worth. And I hope once this is published, is helping you somehow, guiding you and supporting you to understand all these barriers we were talking about, and also opportunities. And that is thank you.
Very good.
Yes, many thanks also from my side, and stay tuned, because there are new documents that will be available soon, both from the Commission and from us, with respect to the white paper that Antonio was mentioning. And thanks a lot for inviting and for letting us this workshop be finalized, let's say.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I see from Anka in the chat that the presentations will be shared soon. I was wondering if we can also have the video from Bern, which was very, very useful, I think, and yeah, it would be great if we can have that. And from us, that's it. Thanks a lot for being here, and yeah. We are in contact. Anything you need, you also can contact us.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.